Good evening and welcome to the Town of Millis Finance Committee meeting. This is Wednesday, February 12th. I'm Jody Garzon, the chair, and I'll have us introduce ourselves.
Sean Power.
Craig Schultz.
Peter Berube.
82, Kathy McGinnis.
Doug Riley.
So for tonight, our first three agenda items we're going to forego because we have some sick folks here at Town Hall who aren't able to to be here. So why don't we just head right into the municipal and school revenue? Or
What about the
you
reserve
have-
fund transfer?
Okay, where,
Or make Mike sit through the whole thing?
oh, the budget request.
See, I'm
pilot.
sticking up for you, Mike.
Okay, yeah. All right, there we go. Why don't we do that? There we go.
You never know you're gonna need a building project, so.
Hello?
like this seat. Who goes first, me or you?
Why don't you go ahead and explain what it is that
Okay.
you'd like us to do?
We need that form that we filled out for reserve fund transfer. What is it? I don't have it in front of me.
Is it in our,
What's the title?
It's,
It's a reserve fund transfer.
It's reverse, yeah, there you go. Reserve fund transfer,
no,
We,
it's in the small package.
small
Oh,
packet.
that
Put the big package out of sight.
yeah, there we go.
You're touching the big package,
Yeah.
you're making a mistake.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, this seems like a lot.
So we're asking for $30,000 for a reserve fund transfer for our line item to pay inspectors for inspector fees. When we did the budget, we took a guess on how many inspections there may be, which all relates to construction activity, right? So we have a lot of construction activity, and we've used up all the money. Actually, if you do approve tonight's funding, we're going to use $10,000 of it for last month's bill to pay the wire inspectors and the plumbing inspector and the building inspector that's up there at Toll Brothers. So in the budget, when I made my budget proposal, I added from $45,000, I put in $90,000. And, nobody's got a crystal ball, but we could just guess. $40 per inspection, how many inspections they're going to be is based on, construction activity. So right now, we're booming with a lot of construction activity. So we need the $30,000 so we can pay the people in the building department.
And approximately, how long do you think that will take you?
It should take us the next couple months. So
Okay.
I was going to ask for more, obviously, but in conversations with Mike, he felt as though that $30,000 until you get into the latter part of the fiscal year would probably be more amenable right now.
So maybe April,
Yeah.
we'll see you back here.
We'll have to, yeah.
Most likely.
We'll have to wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
they're going like gangbusters at the Toll Brothers, they're going gangbusters at Acorn Street, they're going,
Yep.
plus we have a lot more projects that have been approved that are in the works that are coming.
Right.
So, if the economy stays the way it is, we're gonna be really busy for the next couple, 3, 4 years till the economy goes the other way. And nobody knows when that's gonna happen. But if you look at history, what goes up comes down, right?
Yeah.
So, sooner or later it'll come down.
It will.
But right now, we're on the upside, and that's a good thing.
It is, yeah, the money's coming into the town.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah,
this is a
money.
way to get it over into your budget.
Right, I don't know, I think the number that we took in last calendar year was 560 or 540,000, I forget, but over 500,000.
Wow.
And if the assisted living comes in this fiscal year coming, which we assume, the new people bought it, they're going to be putting up a sign, so all that is pointing towards they're going to build it.
That's the one on Bridge Street?
Yeah,
Okay.
so, that's probably a $23 to $28 million project, times $20 per thousand. You can run the numbers, that's how much the building permit fee will be, just for one project, so. could be, $300,000 to $500,000 just for a building permit fee, just for one job.
Yeah.
So, plus we got a lot more stuff, right? We got storage building that's been approved, it's going to go up where the old
what?
junk, storage building,
Yep.
where the junkyard was. You got 340Bs that are going to be going on, you got
Do you want to just tell people what those are?
40Bs?
Yeah, well, I mean, where they are.
Oh, you got one at 114 Union Street, you got one over here on Main Street, next to the tackle shop, and then you got Tom Roach down the road, back of what's the name of that real estate agent?
Used to be Northeast.
Yeah, in the
I
back
don't
there.
know.
Signature.
Yeah.
And you got one going on now at Van Cleek. Tom McDonough's got one ongoing,
Yep.
so Tom's working on it.
Yeah. My only thought is we reduced reserve fund this year to only 50. I don't think there's a reason not to approve it. I'm just pointing out that we only will have 20,000 left when this is done.
Yeah, that's not
So
good.
if there's another revisit in April, we're going to possibly have an issue, or if anything surprising comes up. Not that this isn't something that needs to be done, but we've got to take this into account when we do next year's budget, because we reduced the stabilization fund from 75,000 to 50,000 this year, and the reserve fund, thank you. And we reduced the request on this item from where it was to 45,000, or whatever it came in originally. Yeah, 45,000.
45, yeah.
Yeah, so we cut the place we can pay for it if we have overages, and we put ourselves in a position almost guaranteed we'd have overages. So let's keep that in mind if we do this year's budget, but obviously, we've already incurred 10,000, so we got to pay the people and keep the projects moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, in this upcoming budget proposal, I put a 90,
Yep.
so,
Yep.
just to try to compensate for it, so,
And what did you have this year?
90,000.
Last
Yeah,
fiscal year, it was
45.
45.
45? Oh, doubled it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
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 And I'll make a motion to approve this transfer as written for $30,000 to the inspection compensation line.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve transfer of $30,000 to the inspector compensation line from the reserve fund. Further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll all have to sign the original.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for updating us.
Thank you.
Do you want
Yeah.
to get into it?
All right, based on the feedback from the last tri-board meeting, I went home and worked on the revenue allocation a little bit more, and I've included a worksheet this time. I'm going to walk through the proposal again that I've put together, and then we'll get to the worksheet second, so don't dive into the numbers yet. I know you're all itching to. The history, obviously, we all remember. It's a 22-year-old formula. It's time to stop focusing on revenue and start focusing on the expense side. The Glen is going to bring in a lot of extra revenue over the next 8 to 10 years, and we got to discuss how that's going to be allocated. This doesn't include any new commercial growth, any cost sharing, increases in state aid, or unforeseen mandates. But that's just a given. If we cannot capitalize on all of those things, we will, and try to make the picture a little bit better. So the goal is to make a simple formula. So the formula takes all the revenue in, subtracts out excluded revenues, the free cash and things. And the excluded revenues are revenues that we don't use for budget. And typically, we don't use those for budgets because they're one-time revenue sources. Like free cash has been up to $1 million, and it's been low as $300,000, $200,000. So if you start building a budget using free cash, some years you have so much money in it that you can add a ton of positions, and then next year you can't sustain them. So the only money that should be used for a budget in good fiscal practice would be sustainable money, which comes from the state, from taxes, from user fees, from those solid, hard numbers that come in year after year and grow a little bit each year. Free cash and enterprise funds and overlay surpluses and ambulance and permits and all those are excluded when we talk about the budget. When we get to the worksheet, I'll get into how that's figured. Then we subtract the shared cost, and those include some items on the cherry sheet. And the cherry sheet's the governor's sheet for revenue estimates. It's called the cherry sheet, and I found this out 5 years into my FinCom tenure because it used to be red. Now it's not red, but the name stuck.
The name of the paper color is called cherry.
Yeah. So you get the cherry sheet from the governor and the state and the legislature. And it tells you how much money the town gets. What the state gives, the state also takes away. They subtract things from the cherry sheet, so that's all factored in. It comes off the top. General insurance, employee benefits, tri-county schools, and non-excluded debt. Non-excluded debt is debt that is paid through normal operating revenues, not through debt exclusion. So the library, the police station, the school, the fire station, all of that is excluded debt. That's money that was set aside just for those items. Non-excluded debt would be things like the fire truck, where we are using operating funds to buy the fire truck or pay for the fire truck. Those things are usually a shorter duration. There's not an override vote on them, and they don't cause the taxes to go up. They use recurring money to pay for them. So then we just subtract the prior year's budgeted revenue, and that tells us how much money we have for next year. So the proposal is for budgets to grow 4% each year over the prior year base. So if you had $100 in the budget this year, it would go up to $104 next year. If we don't have enough money to grow by 4%, we just take whatever growth we have and we divide that evenly. So that addresses the concern that we may not have enough to sustain 4% growth. I've run this model out for 10 years. It looks great until you get to the 8th year. 8th year looks good. 9th year starts looking rocky, and 10th year looks a little rough. For those people that occupy these seats in 9 years, form a committee. Figure it out on year 7. Okay. But that's a longer outlook than we've had on most things, and that's a good start. I propose reviewing it often.
Why you think the 7th year starts to become a problem? 8th year?
The 9th and 10th year become problematic because Glen Ellen is finished building out, so you don't have the revenue stream coming in. So as you start losing the inflated revenue stream from new construction at the 324 house level, it starts to compress the money that's available because you don't have as much coming in year over year.
But you'll be getting real estate taxes in.
You do, but that's only.
Which are more than the building fees.
I'm not talking building fees. I'm talking about adding that many more homes onto the. When those homes come online, it jumps you up by 24 homes at the tax rate, or 40 homes at the tax rate. Then the following year, you only get the typical tax rate for those. You don't get the 40 more homes rolling in. So if you have a constant growth, if we can find a replacement for Glen Ellen in year 7, we're great. If we don't have replacement coming in, then we have to keep looking at options. But it gets us a long ways out there. If we have dramatically excessive funds, for instance, if Glen Ellen were to build 100 homes in 1 year, because I've only assumed 30 to 40 homes a year based on the conversation we had at the last meeting. If they were to build 100 homes in 1 year, it might be prudent to put some of that excess funds into stabilization to pay for some of those future years.
Yeah.
But that's a discussion that can be had at the time when that happens. It doesn't have to be decided now. And then excess funds can be used for whatever we think they can be used for. If they're used inside a budget, it becomes problematic because then you have to pay for them in the future years. But if they're used for capital, if they're used for tax cuts, if they're used for roads, if they're used for whatever is determined that we would like to use the excess funds for, as long as it doesn't go into operating budgets, it's sustainable. So a road is built, when the road is done, you don't have to pay for it the next year. You can do another road, but the road that you've built, you've got. If you buy a truck, you own the truck. So capital projects don't need sustainable funds. They can be done each year as money permits. So just a little bit more narrative there about the 4%. 4% seemed like a reasonable number when I was looking at it because it should handle normal union increases. And it would be better than most of the years we've had in the past. So it seems like a reasonable size growth rate. Proposal is to put together a plan that covers 3 years at a time, meet every 3 years officially to redo the formula. But at every winter tri-board meeting, we discuss the numbers and load the numbers in. So now I want to jump to the worksheet page. I'm going to get out a second chart that I have. I think it'll become clear as we go through the worksheet how this works, how this was going a little bit. The first side of the worksheet let me find Carol's sheet from last night. Here it is. All right. So the first page, lines 1 through 47. So flip it over. There you go. This is just an expanded version of what Carol handed out at the meeting. For FY21, which is the first year, I'll walk through the worksheet first so you understand what we're looking at. The red numbers across the top are the number of homes I assumed built at Glen Ellen. So if that 40 turned into 100, it would change the number of the dollars of revenue we're getting from Glen Ellen dramatically. When we're done with it, that can only total 324. So I only put the first 5 years on, but I was told that they're doing between 40 and 50 homes a year. So I stretched it out to about FY28, I think is when it went to. So going across the top in red, you have the homes at Glen Ellen. The blue column is this current year's budget. And as we work our way down, we have the allowable growth. So right now, where it says real and property taxes, line 5, we're going to have $22,032,000 of property taxes, which agrees, which is moved over to the top of the second column, which is our starting place. And that's Carol's number. So all these numbers tie to Carol's within a few $100s. So that $22,032, or $22,032,000 can grow by allowable growth, which is $550,000. And that $550,000 is just 2.5% of that number up above. Then you can have typical new growth. And Carol said this new growth is estimated at $698,739, so I plugged that number in. In out years, as we look at FY22, 23, 24, 25, I used my Glen Ellen figure of 40 homes or 50 homes to arrive at the number that says new revenue available from the Glen. And then the difference between that and Carol's number is how much I put in for typical new growth. So Carol had forecast numbers for 5 years. I used her numbers exactly, but I just broke it between Glen Ellen and other non-Glen Ellen related growth.
Because we don't really know what the typical new growth numbers have been for, say, the past 5 years?
It's been between $300,000 and $400,000. I think this is relatively conservative. Carol's number, I believe, was very conservative because she didn't factor in the Glen at all. She just grew new growth by 2.5% each year. And
Yep.
if you do have something coming on with 40 or 50 homes, or the assisted living facility or any of those coming on, it's going to have a dramatic impact on it.
True.
So this is a conservative number as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
And FY21 is what I really want to focus on this year too, because that's what we have to decide on. As we work our way through, we get state aid, which increased by 0.19%. I broke out each of the component parts of state aid because state aid gives it to us by line. That's exactly what Carol has also in hers. So Chapter 70 is school money. Then it goes down to unrestricted charter funds, school choice, veterans, VBS, and elderly and public libraries. The ones with asterisks, the school, the veterans, the VBS, and libraries are earmarked for their respective departments. They can't be used in the general funds. So you'll see them coming out in a few minutes when we get to the exclusions. Okay? So then we come down, so any questions on the top two sections? Let's pause there.
Could you quickly tell me or explain the logic as to why allowable new growth is added to typical new growth? Allowable kind of tells me, I mean,
I'm sorry.
why are we expanding it by 2.5 twice?
It's not. Allowable growth is the 2%.
Right.
Typical new, 2.5%, thank you. Typical new growth are new homes that have been built that are now hitting the tax base that are in excess of that 2.5%. So I can tax all the existing homes we have in the town and increase revenue by 2.5%.
Right.
If I build a new home, I get to bring them on at $17 and whatever cents per thousand.
So said another way, allowable growth is really just your
Prop
Prop 2.5.
Yes.
Yep.
Then you have your projected typical, which is
Yeah.
typical new growth. You project That's based on their 25 units at whatever the
Right.
rate is.
Plus what other stuff is coming in, because 25 units gets you about $280,000, and then there's additional money that Carol has earmarked there, also just normal housing development.
Okay, so you've answered another one of my questions,
Yeah.
because you've kind of kept saying the Glen, but this new growth number is all new, projected new growth.
For
which is-
FY
Which is key to this debate, this
For
discussion.
FY '21.
Okay.
Then what I did was I held Carol's number, so she had put in 716,000 for FY '22, 716,208, and if you add up my numbers, you will get $716,208 for the
That's between the third and fourth lines there, the 377, 520,
377,520
and the
plus 330.
338,
So that-
688.
Okay.
So since I took Carol's number as the basis, so I didn't deviate from her estimates at all, since she's a town accountant for this, the town finance director,
Yep.
and I had an estimate for what the Glen was coming in, I just forced the other new growth to keep her number.
I see.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
Just one,
Yeah.
so I got the FY '22, where, I don't know, you say included below
Okay,
in the FY '21, what do you mean included below?
okay, the state aid? Or which line are you talking
New,
Three.
new revenue.
Oh,
the
it's
black-
included below, I didn't have a number for Glen Ellen, I just lumped it all into the 698.
It's in the 698.
Oh,
Oh,
no,
Yeah.
okay.
mine.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Well, it just said below, and I
Yeah.
thought there was a reference to something.
I tried to fit the line below, but then it ran over the cell.
And so this is just, the Glen numbers that you're using are simply just the number of homes.
Times 470, or whatever the base, I looked up the cheapest unit, and I can't recall what it was.
Yeah.
I used that as my,
Times the 17.
times the non-excluded debt. Because excluded debt doesn't matter, that's not giving us money we can use.
right.
It will lighten your tax burden for everybody else because it'll be spread over more homes, but it's not giving us money we can use for this. All right, so as we move down, we get to the cherry sheet, we understand where that number comes from. We have other lines that come in, local receipts, transfer from special funds. That's ambulance funds and things like that that come in that are earmarked. You'll see those are going to come out in a little bit. Free cash, enterprise funds, cannabis tax, I included nothing for FY '21, but I assumed $100,000 for FY '22. I might be wrong on that assumption, but I put that in as an assumption. That was not included in Carol's number.
Yeah,
But if they're opening, they're going to be paying some taxes.
one would assume.
And I saw 3,333,000 on the sheet in a lot of places, so I assumed. And then based on the conversation again last night, I assumed that decreased by 2.5% each year. As more places opened, competition got higher, and we lost our monopoly.
Yep.
Okay? So I thought that was a fair estimate.
Excuse me, Madam
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Craig, is this money that has to be used for marijuana purposes?
No, this is non-host community agreement money. This is straight sales tax. So that goes into general fund that can be used like any other type of fund. Host community money isn't even reflected here. That can be used only for marijuana-related expenses. Or they have to have a nexus to marijuana at
Yeah.
some point. All right, so that gets us down to state aid and other sources. So that gives us a total for FY '21 of $36,961,364, which is about $340 off Carol's number. I'll live with that, okay? As we move down, so that's the great news, then the state starts taking back. They take back county taxes, mosquito pollution, air pollution, Metro Area Planning Alliance, RMV, MBTA. Special ed funds are allocated to the school choice, special ed funds, school choice sending, and charter school. So the state's increased our state aid by 0.19%, but they've increased our costs that they're taking back by 1.9%. So at that rate, we'll go broke quick. But that's the way this thing is laid out.
Yep.
The ones with asterisks are addressed later because they're earmarked, again, for the special departments, just like the ones up above. The debt exclusion for the school, we put $3,290,000 in on line 6. We take it out on line 41 because that money can't be used for anything except the school, the police, the library, the debt exclusion items. Which gives us money inclusive of free cash of $33,210,000, which is $249 different than Carol's number. So we'll take it. So that's where Carol left us off last night. Last time we were together, last week. So that number ties. Going across, they tie within a few $1,000s. I included marijuana money, she didn't. So the differences are explainable. The second page is not on any of her worksheet. We have transfers from special funds don't get counted, and that ties exactly to the number up above. The directly allocated state funds net ties to the asterisk item up above. And free cash is removed from that because we can't use free cash for operations. So last night we were looking at it on Wednesday night, and we're seeing a 3% growth in revenue. Well, the important thing is the place our revenue dropped, and Doug, I think you pointed this out, that our revenue is growing about 3%, not the 4% I'm talking about or better. The reason is our revenue is growing in special funds and free cash, and neither of those two things impact our operating budgets at all. So that's $500,000 of revenue loss that we have that doesn't touch operating budgets. So you could have operating budgets grow, but you're going to have a problem with free cash.
What are special funds specifically?
That's, ambulance is the biggest item in there.
Okay.
And it's earmarked just for ambulance use.
Could that be used for capital items regarding the ambulance, or?
I don't know the restrictions on it. I just know we can't count it in the operating budget.
Okay.
And I was focused on an operating budget-centric
Yep.
view on this.
Yep.
So we take out $850,000, where in FY20 we took out $1.3 million. So that, you can see there's the delta that we saw last night, which gives us $32,359,000 of available funds total. Then we start backing out all of our shared expenses, and this was detailed on our worksheet. So we take out $500,000 for insurance, and I assumed a 6% growth rate from year to year. We don't have those numbers yet, but I put 6% in for my growth rate. If I'm optimistic, that number would change. If I'm pessimistic, that number would change. But we'll have those in a short period, so we'll know what those are for real. Any shared positions we want to add, I did not put any in, but those would come off the top. If we decided we needed a townwide HR director, we would take it off the top before we do the split. Tri-county, I put in, and I put in a 1% growth in that. That comes off the top. And non-excluded debt. So this is the fire trucks and the other debt that is not borrowed for, so that comes off the top as well. So we take all of those shared costs out, we get $24,827,000 that's available for budgets. Prior year budgets totaled $23,666,000, which leaves us $1,161,000 for budgets that can be allocated. If I grow the budgets by 4% for the school and the 4% for the municipal, that uses $946,000 of that $1.16 million, which leaves us $215,000 left over for capital projects, or whatever is decided to be done with it.
Where did the prior year budgets number come from?
I pulled it off the town website.
Okay.
So if I'm wrong on those numbers, that's something we should check. But the school budget's easy, it's a single line. The municipal budget, you take the total municipal, you have to add up 5 or 6 different departments, and then subtract debt, subtract benefits, and subtract insurance, but I think I got it right. So I will run that number one more time, because it's key to the whole piece.
Right.
But I'm pretty confident. So that's the way it works, and I ran it out for 5 years using my growth assumption. So each year, budgets grow by 4%, and we put about $1 million, what was that, 3, 6, 9? That's about $1.5 million towards capital projects over the next 5 years, beyond 4% growth in budgets, which seemed to be a win all the way around. So a lot of the new growth money that's coming in is being devoted towards capital projects, be it roads, which I would vote for, Or if the selectmen chose to do it, it could go into a tax reduction. I know they've talked about that. But the item is, as long as it doesn't go into budgets, the project is sustainable. Once you start putting 200,000 and 300,000 in a year into budgets more, then you have to grow that next year, and you're gonna run out of money rather quickly. And that's the difference between this and the 65-35 split, because the 65-35 split assumed we used all the revenue. This segregates, this caps our growth rate. But it's able to sustain that capped growth rate for for 8 years if the model holds. So that's the basic proposal. Can I help clarify anything? Because there's a lot of numbers there.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
So, based on this, you're showing FY '20 available funds of $24,006,683.
Yes.
Which ties with Carol's numbers where she, at that.
She didn't go down to that level.
Okay, so we had a budget of $23,666,000.
Some of those funds, but
Where's the roughly for $350,000 in difference there in terms of what we had available, but what we actually budgeted? Where's that?
it might be in capital items that we purchased but I need to check that.
Okay, so, I mean.
Yeah.
So this number is really just trying to get at strictly the operating
only.
budget only, because somehow or other that 350 sounds vaguely familiar from
Yeah.
last year for something.
Yeah, I'm hearing it too, but I can't remember where it is. I need to check that, but I'll put a note and I'll check that.
Well, I know we didn't fully allocate free cash.
Yeah, so let me look into that and see where that came from. And also, I want to find out if Carol's,
We're always leaving something
Yeah.
somewhere for
Right.
reserves
Yeah.
and stabilization.
the other piece that I'd like to check is Carol's numbers, I think, are the current numbers. When we get into the budget, when I looked at this originally, the transfers number I had was about $200,000 less than this 500,000 from what we voted. So I think this might be the numbers we know now, whereas at the time, when we did the budget, we might not have known we had all these funds available. But they float free cash, yes.
Another question for Mr. Accountant. And this is just because this is the first time I'm seeing this and I'm trying
Yeah.
to get around. On the second page, say lines 48 to, then you sum it up on 52, other funds
Yep.
excluded from budget. The directly allocated state funds net,
Yes,
which does tie back to all of the asterisks.
yes.
Isn't the net already reflected in the net revenue on line 47 because you've added the asterisks in under state aid up top and then subtracted them?
I subtracted a portion of them because not all of them come out dollar for dollar. For instance, we get school choice receiving. This is where we make money on school choice. We get 442,000 coming in and send 182 out. But when you're done with that net difference all goes into the school directly, not through the budget process, but through the direct allocation. So that directly allocated state funds are allocated into their operating funds, but not through the budget process. They're not part of the available free cash that we allocate. They'll talk about them and they'll say we use free cash, we use school choice for this, and the library says we use our funds for this, but they're not part of the,
So each one of these is essentially dedicated.
right.
So it's money in, it's money out, and then whatever the difference is goes directly to those entities
Yes.
themselves and are not part of the regular budget
Right.
process.
For instance, the library, the $14,000 is for book purchases. The state has a formula, they give you that much, and you're supposed to use that all for acquisition, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I looked at that, but you have to use it all for expanding your collection or things like that. But there are rules put on this money from the state when it comes in. It has to be used for the areas where it's earmarked. So therefore, it has to be excluded from the total amount that we distribute. I think that I'm after overall is just, because we don't know where everything's coming in this year, it's our first year looking at this, I think that just agreeing that we split evenly and we cap at 4% keeps us from digging ourselves into a hole where we allocate, if I'm right, $1.1 million into budgets and set ourselves up for failure in the future. And if I'm wrong, we grow at an even allocation. And we'll know this as we get a little further into it, and then we'll have some groundwork to lay it on it. My fear is if we stick with 65-35 this year and we do end up with $1.1 million coming in, we're going to set ourselves up for the future of unsustainable budget growth.
Can you talk a little bit about where you came up with the 4% for the growth rate?
Couple places. First, I looked at what we've received for growth in past years, and 4% was among the highest years we ever got for growth. We had one or two that came in the higher than that, but not a lot. Most came in below that. Secondly, it was a number that, looking at many of the contract, total growth that we saw in the salary budgets in the school and for the most part municipal, we didn't have to make cuts last year when we grew at less than 4%, so 4% seemed like a reasonable number for municipal and school. And then finally, it's the number, because I tried 4.25, I tried 4.5, and we ran out of money on year 5 or year 6. So 4 seemed to hit a lot of the benchmarks. Given my druthers, I would have gone 3.75 and not thought about it for 12 years. But 4% seemed like a reasonable number that would actually meet people's needs.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it's maybe a little too high considering, the needs that we do have in different departments in terms of capital and townwide, particularly roads and what have you.
Well, my thought on it was the best case you're going to get with good negotiation, I think, is between around a 3.5-4% increase on a union contract. We looked at many of the municipal ones that were growing significantly higher than that last year. Significantly this year with the school, it came in at about 4, it came just under 4. So I thought with some aggressive negotiation and a capped number, it would work.
Is that a 4% annual or 4% kind of multi-year?
That's 4% in total for the entire base. So I'll do the schools because I had all the detail for it and I didn't have all the detail for that stuff. The base would go up 3% cost of living, a step would give you this, a lane change gave you this, and that's not right on the step. But there was total, for the average total payroll, it was less than 4%. When you figured all the lane changes, the step changes, and the cost of living increases. So I mean, if we're looking to try to get more money into the departments because they need it, you could certainly say this is a 5-year plan and grow it at 4.25%, but then we're going to run out of money very quickly, and we're going to be looking at an operational override or dramatic cuts.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't think putting it higher than 4 would make sense. I'm wondering if putting it lower than 4 might make more sense.
Yeah.
Just to be even more conservative and, be setting aside more funds, because as we were just talking about a little while ago, what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
And our growth rates certainly haven't been 4% through the difficult years.
Right. And I think I think that's quite a reasonable thought, but I also think that we're going to be looking at pretty tough cuts in the municipal and the school side if we go much below 4. I think 4 is a number that's sustainable. I'm worried right now on the municipal side, quite honestly, because as I said ad nauseum, we just added 2 police officers that are going to have to go into this. So that's all part of what we need to cover next year. So I think that 4 gets us there for a lot of reasons, but, and again, I'm open to entertaining changes in that idea each year, that number each year, but I'd like to see where it goes. And if I'm wrong on this and it only turns into 3.5, then I apologize for this complicated spreadsheet.
Well, I've certainly heard the perspective from more than one townsperson, shall we say, that most of the growth is coming on the 55 and older side, and they'd like to see more growth on the town side than the school side because of the changing demographics of the town. This doesn't specifically address that. It sets aside money for capital projects which benefit the whole town. So, I think there's still kind of that discussion that needs to continue to happen, but we do need a plan for,
Yeah.
the coming year. And Rome wasn't built in a
And let me
day.
point out the options for formula modification. Item 3, use different rates for school and muni. That was one of the things that came out of the meeting.
Yeah.
I think that you could consider using a higher rate for municipal, but I would not drop anything below 4 because I think 4 is unsustainable. I think you're going to have to start into the layoff process. But I think that if you kept school at 4 and municipal at 4 1/4, or something that's actually open for consideration. Right now, the Glen is bringing in some revenue. As we get further years out, and we get more and more seniors, more and more people living there that aren't impacting the schools, I think that becomes more important of a conversation. But next year, it's just kicking off. There's not a lot going in there.
Well, and as I understand how that is set up in current tax revenue law, that the Glen has, it's a condo association, and therefore most of the value isn't being taxed right now until all the homes have come on board.
Okay.
So basically, that parcel has been taken off the tax rolls, and only, 5% a year is being added on. So we don't really have a windfall.
Right.
I hadn't been thinking of it that way, that it was going to be structured that way, but knowing that that's how it is now,
Until the last house is built.
until the last house is built, we're not getting the full tax revenue from that development.
Right.
And it took how many years to just get a shovel in the ground over there? If they're doing
Right.
300 houses or whatever.
Well, with
and-
lawsuits and
Yeah.
everything.
Well, right,
Yeah.
but,
Once they got
you know,
permission, they hadn't stopped.
there's certainly been lawsuits on developments as well,
So,
as the
idea-
economy goes south.
The idea behind this is we're only phasing in the revenue,
Mm-hmm.
so I wasn't recognizing $3.3 million on the first year. I've got 25 homes the first year.
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
And then 40, 40, 50, 40, because I was told 40 to 50 are coming in each year. I put 150 in, the rest are all 40s. Except the last one, which I forced to 29 homes to make it work.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have no-
yeah.
I'm trying to be polite. So, back to the line 66.
Yes.
Growth over prior year. Okay, so we talked about the 23.6 versus the 24.
Yep.
In the future years, I see you've done the same thing. It seems to be, I don't see the consistency between the differences there. What are those, how did you come up with those?
The growth over prior
In
year.
other words, FY '22, you have a total available funds of 25,936, less the prior year's budget,
Yep.
which is $200,000 less than the funds available. In '23, you have 26,900 available, less 25,700, which is 200 less, not quite. In other words, the difference is, you built in some cushion in there where the prior year's budget is actually less than the available funds, but I'm not sure I see what the consistency
The
is.
prior year budget would just be, for looking at FY '22, 17,150,000 for the school and 8,446,000 for the municipal. Add those two together and it should equal 25,597. It appears that it does.
No, what I'm saying is that FY '21, you have available 24,827. Then you're carrying forward a budget of 24,612, which you're calling prior year's budget for 2021, and you're taking that out of 2022. right? And each year, you're carrying forward the previous year's budget as less prior year's budget.
Yes.
I'm just trying to understand the difference between for example, the available funds in FY '22, and then under FY '23, the less prior year's budgets. There's a difference in
Oh,
what's available and what you're budgeting for the year,
right.
right?
The
And-
capital
and
It's the capital items.
The capital.
It's the
And that's all,
capital.
and you've just made an assumption in there of different amounts for each year?
I assumed a 4% growth on the operating side, and then anything in excess. So if I have, in FY '22, I have $1.3 million. I'm taking, in excess, I'm taking 984,000 of it, which is the 4% growth, putting it towards the budgets.
983.
Yeah, line 83 is the difference between 984,000.
Okay, you're
Yeah.
back,
Yeah.
it's not flowing
Yeah.
exactly the way it looks linearly.
Right.
You're actually backing into that.
Sad thing is, that's the way my head works. But yes, you're right. I can see how it could be presented
I'm
differently.
just trying to understand how the numbers got to where they
Yeah.
are.
Because
Yeah.
the capital items aren't part of the operating
Right,
budget.
so
Right.
effectively, the difference between the available funds and the budgeted funds is the estimate of the capital items.
Yeah, and I'm using the word capital, and it could be that we all decide we need an HR director, and that's where the money goes, you know, or
Or it all goes to stabilization.
it goes to stable, or it goes wherever we decide. I mean, if they built, if they were, and they're not going to, but if they were to build 100 homes next year at Glenelg and they all hit the tax roll, I would argue that we should probably start loading stabilization and take money out, because that dramatically accelerates our revenue recognition, and it won't last 8 years if we did $1 million of capital work.
I'm just thinking, I've now seen budget preparations from Charlie,
Yeah.
Sue, Carol, and you in the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with Carol all the way on the first page. We don't differ on those numbers at all. I just broke it out in a lot more detail because I needed the detail. And on the second page, this is really what we do. I mean, we need to come up with the way it's allocated. I will plug in the insurance, the employee, and the tri-county and the non-excluded debt. When I get the real numbers from her, I'll put in actual numbers. I just did estimates on them. But then really, that's pretty much our role on the finance committee, is decide how this money is allocated between the two departments, at least the way I see our roles. I know some others have felt that our job is to decide whether it goes to police, DPW, fire, schools. But my view has always been that our job is to make sure it's fairly allocated and let the elected officials of each of those areas decide where it goes, within reason, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that's the second layer.
Right.
First layer is the
Right.
bigger. But you're talking about you're talking about a top-down approach.
Right.
Which is what we're looking at
Right.
here, versus a bottom-up approach, which is what we do week to week.
Right.
Because all those budgets come in from each department and they
Yeah.
aggregate up, whereas what we're saying is we're budgeting from top down and.
Right.
You all figure it out.
Basically, what we're saying is take this pile here and make sure it doesn't exceed $8.121 million. You know, and that's the start. Now, I'm absolutely open to entertaining and hearing ideas. If the municipal side comes in and says that we need to increase hours for this, that, and the other thing, maybe we as a committee decide that, okay, maybe it's 4.5% for municipal, or 4.25% for municipal. That'll change our out years, it'll change our future, but if we go into it with our eyes open, now that we have a budget model that goes out 10 years, and I tried to make it readable, I did not put all 10 years on this, but I'll be glad to share that if anybody wants it. You can start seeing where things start to get ugly if we start changing these percentages too dramatically. I think anything less than 4% is going to precipitate cuts. Anything over 4% shortens our length, our duration, you know, how long this money will get us there.
Peter, you had a question?
I just have a couple questions that I think or maybe points that I think this committee needs to consider, and maybe you can help us with that. And because a lot of the discussion at the tri-board was along the lines of should the Glen revenue be included at all in this equation? And I'm not sure if, I doubt we can, I'm not asking you to do it now or discuss it now, but I think maybe for future consideration, we ought to have that kind of rhetorical, model put in here so that we can take a position on, should that be included in the model or in the revenue disbursements or split, or not?
I'd be glad to have it, but I'll tell you where that will go, because this is where it has gone. Immediately, we're going to get Chapter 70 money. It goes to the school. That's what they'll believe. But right now, Chapter 70 money, which is the only state aid that's actually been growing, and this doesn't really show it, because I just used 1.19% for everybody, but Chapter 70 line item has been growing, and I didn't have a breakdown for this year, so I just used the standard number. That is all directed towards schools in most towns. In our town, we've taken the approach, with the school committee's blessing, and a fight with a state senator at one point who said she argued for more money coming to Millis for schools, and we put it in the general fund and just split it 65-35, which was not her intent. So, so the question is, do we take the $4.8 million of Chapter 70 and assign it to the school? Then you're going to get local receipts. Some of those are coming in off of tickets and other things, so they get assigned to the police. As you start getting more and more granular, breaking this stuff down, it really gets difficult. But I understand the discussion about the Glen and allocating that growth. It's worth considering.
I'm not taking a
yeah,
position on it.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like we as a committee, until we've looked at it closer, because we know it's a question, we know that it's certainly, we spent a lot of time discussing it last week, and in order to make a kind of a educated, decision on it one way or another, I think we ought to have those numbers before us so that we can vote on that, or at least discuss it and have a committee position on it.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to ask, and perhaps this shows my lack of total understanding of, lack of complete understanding of how the budget is developed, but why can't we just take actual salary increases versus, or actual personnel increases year to year versus projecting them at 4%? Especially since most of those personnel and personnel dollars are really, when it gets down to it, they're must-pays. I mean, I think they probably negotiate through collective bargaining those contracts, every 3 years?
Yep.
Those numbers are known. Why guess at 4% when we can do better? We know what the actuals are in some cases.
Well, because if I were to use actuals, the 4% wouldn't be high enough in this case, in a lot of
Okay.
cases. Yeah, and it provided some guidance to give some strength towards better, more prudent budgeting. I mean, and that's the line that I've seen taken, that there's only this much more coming in. Yeah, so instead of, and negotiate around that number. But I understand what you're saying. We can look in that. And the Glen this year would put about $209,000 in of revenue for this year, just looking at the 25 homes that I assumed.
I did look into per pupil school spending. We have ClearGov, so I was able to look at the comparison between Millis and comparable towns. There's 3 different comparables that you can use on the ClearGov system, their little website. And, Millis is consistently right around the state average, and in most cases, lower cost per pupil than our surrounding towns, although Medway is a little less right now. But not by much. It's pretty comparable.
Yeah.
So, I know there are some folks who have mentioned to me that they think that, school spending has been outpacing other municipal departments, or what's been available to them to use. I don't think any of us would argue that the Council on Aging is living in luxurious, operating in a luxurious setting. And we see the senior centers that other towns have, and it seems like the seniors have not really been a high priority here. But it is worth noting that we're not spending per pupil disproportionate to kind of what other communities are doing in the area.
I would hazard a guess, and I hate to do this, but that perception is probably colored by a brand-new school and not necessarily the operating budget.
True.
Right.
Which is not a per pupil. The new school does not factor into
Right.
per pupil spending, but when you look at it, you can certainly have that perception that we're spending way more
Yeah.
than our surrounding
Well,
towns.
and a couple things just to point out though, and again, it's the capital versus operational. We built a senior center, one of the first, I mean, back in '99, that's when this was built, and it was built before the library, before the school, before the police. We've been talking about all of those things. So the fact that it's now 20, well, it's as old as my son, 21 years old, it, if you look at the picture of the dedication of the building, my wife's pregnant, so, okay, a little family heirloom there. But it's time for something to be considered for that. Even if it was good enough 19 years ago, when it was a fantastic new space designed for them, it's 19 years old and it needs to be looked at again. And there's a committee doing that, but that won't come out of operational, that'll come out of capital.
Right.
And I think the concern that I have about the whole Council on Aging, a site that's open 20 hours a week, to dedicate a $7 million building to something that's open 20 hours a week is not going to sell well. So we have to increase the hours for it, which would be the operational side.
Right.
So for $25,000 to $50,000, it would put us comparable to every other town's Council on Aging spend, and they're open for 40 hours. So if that would be something that would be proposed, and we thought to consider it, and we thought we could add it, maybe that's a bump. So the 4% is the starting guideline. If we wanted to eat into this, if I'm right, $215,000 to put 25 or 40,000 towards the Council on Aging to expand hours, that's certainly that I think that we as a committee could listen to. I say capital because I'm biased about not hitting the budgets, but I can easily for this exercise, I was biased for not hitting the budgets.
Right.
But I'd be influenced to hear that the Council on Aging could use more hours,
Well-
especially if we're going down the road of considering a new facility for them too.
Right, and considering the changing demographics of
Yeah.
the town with the increase in the
Yeah,
55 and older population,
right. So I mean, if that's
which I'm.
a
glad to be
reasonable
hearing.
need, yeah. If that's a reasonable need, then I'm absolutely, and I think it is reasonable to ask for that. I'd be surprised if they didn't ask for more there. There's things I wouldn't necessarily agree with, but that's one I'd listen hard to.
Yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, for this year, to try to expedite this a little bit, we need an agreement for something to present week after next. I'll dumb this down a little bit, get rid of a few of the lines, but I thought you needed to see the sausage making. I can summarize it. Thank you, Doug, for looking at it.
You said something earlier about the 1.16
What line? Can you just-
on line 70,
Yeah,
item I in red.
Yep.
You said something about if we just did a 65-35 split,
yeah.
then we have problems of unsustainability going forward.
Yes.
Can you
Yeah, because,
that a little more? Because that's what we've been doing, and that's
Right.
what, and that's what we're sort of talking about deciding to change.
yeah, I'll walk you through that one. So using that 1.16 million, right now, I put 946,000 into the budget. That's line 82. That left 215,000 left over. In the 65-35 split model, I would have taken 139,000 of that 215 and added it to the school. And I would have taken 75,000 of that 215 and added it to the municipal side. Now, that increases my base. When I go into FY '22, I now have a significantly higher budget, but $215,000 higher budgets.
yep,
So as I perpetuate that out over the years, that kind of growth rate gets us out of money in about 5 years, so.
because the growth doesn't backfill that.
Right.
And then there isn't enough to keep on that growth path. We can't do the 4%.
Right.
Growth.
We can't even do 3% growth at some point.
Right, then,
Yeah.
as budgets are increasing through collective bargaining and what have you, then positions are going to have to be cut. Because the biggest expense for all of these departments are salaries.
Right. It would be almost a 5% growth. If we did the 65-35 split, we'd be looking at a 5% growth, not a 4% growth.
Yep.
I almost think that, one, I think it's a great question, and Craig, I think that's a good answer. And it's almost something that you need to make sure that you explain this when you're just,
Yeah.
explain that fact clearly and upfront before you get bogged down, or hit it at, at the end, so that everybody's clear that that's the number one benefit behind a 4%.
Is what?
I mean, I get it.
To not have to lay
That you-
people
that
off.
you don't run out as fast. You have a temporary swell in revenue, which will go away, and you can't sustain those expenses if, at a 65-35, unless you can project more growth in
Right.
8 and 9 years from now.
Right.
That is equivalent to
5.
what
Yeah.
what is coming on because of the Glen.
Right. And I think that I've always looked at it as it's the difference between a bonus and a salary. If I get a bonus, which I haven't lately, but if I were to get a bonus, you put it towards cash remodeling the kitchen. If you go out and buy a mortgage a house based on assuming that bonus money's coming in every year, you can get into trouble pretty quick. I'm quite a fiscal conservative for a very liberal person. So it's I think what it might make sense is to show what the 65-35 model would do on this, and you can see how rapidly budgets go up. Everybody will love it. If you've got a 3-year term as a selectman, you can walk out saying you've funded all this and walk away into the sunset. It's great.
I will tell you
But
that
in year
that's
5, somebody's got to pay the
that
piper.
whole issue of you will run out of you will run out of additional revenue to fund those new positions that you bring on while, let's say, you're onboarding the Glen revenue. I will tell you that, to me, that's a reason not to include the Glen revenue. To me, it's you exclude the Glen revenue from this discussion, and you consider that Glen revenue as either pay for capital items or something else. But to me, an argument could be made, and that's why I'm curious to see the numbers, to see if it supports kind of the theory that you'd have an easier time managing that if you excluded the Glen revenue, which is a new revenue, which is going to go away at some point.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the numbers. If you excluded the money that came in that year but rolled it into the ongoing tax base, it changes things. It stretches a little bit. There's ways to look at it, but it will mean you're going to grow less than 4% in each of the departments, and that means there will be cuts and layoffs. I mean, that means we will look at operating cuts and layoffs. I do understand where you're heading with it, and I thought down that path, but I mean, if I'm looking at the Glen, FY '22, it's bringing in 377, I've got 338,000 of capital. So it just about covers all the capital there.
It's pretty close.
It's pretty close, but as you get out to some outer years, but that's just the money coming in that year. If I excluded the accrued taxes that it would generate, because I've got the
Right.
25 homes that came on this year, plus the 40 homes next year,
Right.
plus the 40 homes next year, you run out of money pretty quickly. And you'll be looking at, I think it'd be forcing us into making cuts in budgets without truly having the fiscal crisis that we're forcing ourselves into. My goal was twofold: sustain as long as possible and not force cuts to budgets. Not to grow budgets, not to add extra stuff, but just to
'Cause if
get
we-
through as many years possible with this level of service and do capital.
I think we
Yeah.
should be sensitive to, and this gets back to another question that I raised earlier, in terms of use actual personnel costs and cost growth, use actual, because if you allow 4%, you're avoiding budget discipline and you're allowing yourself to grow 4% when maybe you don't have to. Maybe that money could be used elsewhere or shouldn't be spent. It should go to stabilization, it should buy down, debt.
Yeah, I actually disagree with you on that point, because I think you're imposing budget discipline. I saw contracts come out that were 10 and that were not 8, 9, and 10% increases on contractual salary.
Not on the municipal side, Madam Chair.
And that was the municipal side, by the way.
Okay,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wanted to say who, not per
No,
year.
because I want to make sure I'm right on the numbers before I quote that high of a
Yeah,
number.
well, I know I'm right on the union numbers, and following up on what Peter said, the town administrator knows for 3 years what the costs are going to be for each employee. And the last union contracts ranged from 2% per year, and the third year, I believe, was 2.5%. Now, many employees are at their top level on the municipal side, so they're not going into new steps. You can tell by the number of employees in Millis, a lot of them have been at the 8th step, and the new employees, there's talk once in a while of adding a step in a union contract. Now, I didn't know if the school unions were public information, they too should know a 3-year outlook. And I believe somehow that the town should follow up on what Peter says and at least know what the operating costs for the employees
Yeah.
would be for 3 years. And I'd also like to talk about your ClearGov comment. A lot of towns, the employee benefits come out of the school side. So you might be seeing that in the, I know a few towns that they take the, what employ, the health insurance especially.
right.
Comes out
And
from
that-
the school side. of
That goes
the money.
into the school
But
budget.
I believe though, on the per student calculation on the school side, because we asked this when we implemented it, I think that's included in. I believe it's all included. I think it's apples to apples because it's a number the state uses. So I
But
think the
meanwhile,
per
and then
student.
my other question, Madam Chair, is when the schools hire, do they take into account that, what the employee costs are going to be, that will be incurred when this employee is hired? So that it's not just a certain amount of money each year, it would be including the benefits.
Well, that brings me to an item that I think makes a lot of sense, which is put the benefits in the budgets.
Into
So-
the individual
into the
departments.
department level budgets. I think
Yeah.
that does make perfect sense. That's exclusive of this, but I would do that as my starting base.
Because we've
and just roll
certainly
it
asked
forward.
that question
Yep.
before,
I think it
when
makes
you
sense
hire a
to do that.
firefighter or a
Even on the
police
school
officer.
side?
Even on the school side, I'd
Yeah.
put it into the school and
Well,
I'd put
that's
it
the
into.
first I've heard of this.
No, it came up last night at the meeting.
Yeah, but a meeting last
Yeah.
night?
Wednesday night.
last-
Oh, okay.
Last time we got together as a
It
group.
was just came
Last
up as
week.
an item, it wasn't discussed on.
Well, I think it made a lot of sense to do it, but we've asked
No,
for,
but
we've asked for it
wasn't
many
voted
times.
on or anything.
No.
So You keep
But-
saying last night.
Well, the last meeting, yeah. And then but I will say the school budgets have been growing, the salaries on the school side have been growing less than 4% a year. I know that because I've got access to that number and I've seen it. I think what we miss on some of it is we look at a 3% increase for this part, then there's steps, and then there's other pieces with the union contract. So I'd like to check to see that number, because I looked at salary growth, not union contractual growth, but salary growth for several town departments year over year. And if we haven't been adding people, we've been seeing dramatic growth in salary lines. I don't get down to the person level, but I do look at how much we had in the 19 budget, the 20 budget, the 21 budgets, and I see budgets where, assuming the staff is flat, growing by 8, 9, or 10% on the salary side. So I don't.
see where
yeah.
that, with
Yeah.
all due respect,
Yeah. I'll pull the numbers and look at it.
Show that to us
Yeah.
and Give me a particular case
Yeah.
where that is, because.
I'll pull the numbers and look at it. And it could have been adjustments that were made or something else, but.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
look at every year when we're given the prior year's budget and the current year, I look at the growth rates
Yeah.
on the different line items, and sometimes it's higher
Does the
than I
school
would think.
provide, like, Madam Chair, the town provides the operating budget, and is the operating budget just the employees, or is that including Xerox paper and everything to operate that department?
all in there.
It's all in there.
Okay.
I mean, I actually brought the school budget book, but, it's
It's highly
got a lot of information in it.
So now we're talking about this year having each, because the enterprise funds each take each employee's salary, vacation days, that comes out of the water and sewer budget for those employees that work at it.
And stormwater.
Right. So,
And that's a whole other issue that, is being looked into, as we
so are we
know.
deciding this week that the school department's going to assume their health insurance benefits for employees?
We got to talk to the town administrator about that to make sure that they are capable of putting that in. It's a mechanical piece. I don't know how it's set up, but I think we should recommend it.
I would recommend that
Each department. not
each
just the
department
school.
has their benefits included. And, we've talked about not just the benefits, but also the pensions and former employees. But I think that's a whole other issue.
Let's start with health insurance. 'cause it's the biggest-
Let's start with health insurance.
Because I see in the minutes, Madam Chair, the last FinCom minutes that, Craig, you were given the amounts of the, you requested the finance director to provide you with the history of the cost of health insurance for each department. Did that include the school?
It did, and it was very complicated. I needed a lot more. I do this as a hobby. I needed some professional assistance on
If you
that.
can request that as a
Yeah.
board?
I think we need to request it not in the data dump that I got, but in this is how much goes to sewer, this is how much goes to DPW, police, fire, school, each of them, yeah.
The breakdown of
The
health
breakdown,
insurance
yeah.
costs.
It was very helpful to have, I just didn't have time to sort through it all. Yeah.
So it wasn't curated per se,
It was, yeah, yeah.
more raw
Does that
data
require
and
a
everything.
motion to ask for something?
No, I think we can
No,
just
we
request it.
can, I usually just ask Deirdre to,
Okay.
yeah, put in the request.
I think that's a good point, because I think that gets closer to accurate budgeting on an operating basis for the two sections. And, you know, I think if you're gonna make a change from the way we've been doing it, and it's not as though I'm, you know, adamantly defending the 65-35 or adamantly pushing for or against changing it, but, you know, it's a lot, there's a lot of assumptions that are in here, and there's a lot of unknowns that that we're sort of, you know, trying to get our hands on, and getting, the key here, if we're gonna make a change, the key to me is getting the base cost budgets correct before we set a new path for particular growth. With the 65-35, I still am not sure I get why one is unsustainable and the other is sustainable. What we historically do is if you take the 65-35 split based on what's available, you know, we go through the budget requests and we have the capital items as a sort of a separate bucket, and we, you know, go through and we adjust and we allocate everything out, and we reduce certain things on the school budget, we reduce certain things on the municipal budget to trade off for capital items. At the end of the day, it still works out to be the same dollars. And if you carry this forward, it seems to me that it's still the same dollars. It's just a question about how it's going to be allocated between operating budgets for the school, operating budget for the town, and capital expenditures. So,
Well, dollars aren't dollars. I mean, recurring dollars are different than non-recurring dollars. And that's how many, many towns have gone into deep, deep financial trouble. When they start spending things like free cash for operating budgets.
right. But we don't.
And as long as we, well, yeah, and I think that much of our new found development wealth is more equivalent to free cash than it is to sustainable stuff. You know, as this,
Well, it depends on what you
Yeah.
mean sustainable, right?
Yeah.
So we're bringing on all these homes at the Glen.
yep,
And it's going to step up year by year by year. It's going to step up our overall tax revenue.
Right.
Okay? And we're going to count that as new growth. And it's going to be higher than it historically has been because that's a big development. And then we're going to build up to a certain point, and it's going to get to a level where it just stops going up. It levels off.
The growth
But
level stops.
Oh,
our entire base is now at that level.
yeah, and at that point, the new growth only goes by 2.5% a year, not 4% a year. And
Right.
then, at that point, then you have to do an operational override or dramatically cut. Well, expenses aren't going to grow at 2.5%. If the state's growing at less than 1%, that's our revenue source.
But you have a 4% growth rate on here.
I did say we had trouble when we got out to year 8 or 9.
All I'm saying is
Yeah,
that if you
yeah.
take this out to year 10, you
Yeah.
have your base, and yeah, if you're only going to get at that point a 2% Prop 2.5 growth
Yeah.
rate in your base, and nothing else changes at a
Yeah.
rate greater than 2.5%, then your operating budgets can never grow at more than 2.5%.
Right.
And if you have capital items, you either have to borrow money to pay for them, or you have to reduce budgets in order to pay
Right.
for those capital items. So it still
yeah.
comes back to me is, if you're separating recurring and non-recurring revenues, that's great. You want to have your operating budgets on recurring revenues, which is tax revenue, which would be built into the base from the Glen. At that higher level, you would just have a step down in the growth rate from the 4% that you've assumed to a 2.5%.
Right.
If that's all you can
Right.
get. So at the end of the day, we budgeted out the dollars are still the dollars. If you're looking at recurring revenue dollars, then that's what you have to work with for your operating budgets. And they can only grow at whatever rate they can grow at.
But the reality is our budgets, if our budgets only grow at 2.5%, then we're in for devastating cuts. And it's just the reality of it. When they grow at 3.5%, we start looking at having to reduce staff.
At what point do you come, though, Madam Chair, that staff is enough?
I'm not talking about it.
No, I'm just like a hypothetical. At one point, if the schools aren't growing,
Right.
Yeah,
At what point
that's a
do you
question
say,
that's out there.
okay, we don't need any more staff.
We haven't
The way
added-
I've been looking
yeah.
at it now, you give them money, they're gonna spend what you give them. Every department's gonna spend what you give them. No one gives money back. So you try to,
Yeah, the point, nobody's added staff. The only staff that's been added in my recent memory are 2 police officers. There have been no staff added at the school. There's been no staff added at the Council on Aging, library, any place I can think of. 2 police officers and maybe a half-time position at the library a few years ago, but nothing much. So nobody's adding staff. It's the contractual raises that are getting you. If you think you can get every union in the town to agree to a 2% raise to give you a 0.5% for other expense growth, I think we're dreaming. I think then we're going to start having to make staff cuts to sustain the raises that we have to go out there. That's all I'm saying. Nobody's talking about adding staff. There hasn't been staff added in this town in any significant
but
measure.
you don't know that about the school side.
I do. We see their budget every year, Kathy. We get a thick binder, thicker than this, every year from the school, and we see every position in the school budget with salary for every position.
Yep.
That's how I can say with certainty that their budgets don't grow by significantly more than 4% each year. 4% has been the highest I've seen it grow since the new negotiations started, where they flat out said, this is all the money we have. If we told people that they had a 65-35 split and put more money into it, I'm confident that we would start hiring staff. I'm trying to avoid hiring staff. I'm also trying to avoid firing staff. And that's the key. I want to keep what we got, give them a fair raise, and then if we need more, it has to be an override to let the voters decide. I'm not going to say good or bad about that, but the voters get to decide. And that's how it needs to progress. But I didn't want to make an imposed cut because we reduced it to an unrealistically low number. I didn't want to make it so high they could add staff. So that's where I went. And I'm willing to entertain certain targeted positions. I think that makes sense, especially an HR director. And as I said before, I'm open to the thoughts in the Council on Aging.
Well, I think we do want to continue to push on all departments to try to share personnel where they can, and particularly administrative functions between the school and town departments, where there can be some cost savings in sharing an HR director or in the finance offices and administrative positions as well. And regional sharing where we can, but not everyone likes to play nice.
Or privatize.
Possibly. I mean, I think, I look at our animal control officer and what an exemplary job she is doing, serving both towns and as well as our energy director, the Green Communities, Bob Weiss, that he's, both those positions are doing really well for the town, shared across with other communities. And, I think we'd like to see more of that where we can. I think our mandate here tonight is to try to have a recommendation that we pass on to the school committee and the select board. So I put that back onto everyone. Where do we stand in that process here?
Madam Chair, should we talk about the health benefits going back to the school first?
I don't think that's going to change anything because it would just give us a different base starting point. I mean, let's just suppose that they had a.
But we just talked about changing it.
No, I know, but you would start them, the way I would handle that
Because it's
is,
already pulled out.
yeah, I'm looking for the number, bear with me.
58?
Employee benefits of $5,141,000. Let's, for argument's sake, say that $3.5 million of that is school and the rest is municipal. I would increase the school budget for the base year to start, because I'm gonna move that money down. I'd take the 15,857,000 and increase it by 3.5 million. I'd increase the municipal side from 7,800,000 by whatever the difference is, and then that would be my go forward. So it doesn't change the, and then.
Well, it would for future years.
For
but
future
then
years
be
it would.
Cognizant
Yeah.
of what an employee is costing.
I agree totally for future years, but for the purpose of trying to recommend an allowance growth rate for the school or municipal, it's not going to change what we can vote on tonight as far as that goes. It's just going to give them more incentive to control their costs going forward.
Which I think is an important
I think that's an
thing.
important
Yeah.
piece, yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that, that's why it's on the list.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the need to decide whether we stick with 65-35, which I believe is going to produce unsustainable growth in future years. We cap it at 4%, and if it's less than 4%, we just divide it evenly, which is in effect the 65-35 formula. And just decide it for FY '21, because they're looking for guidance from us. So my proposal would be, and my motion would be, that we set, I move that we cap municipal and school growth at 4% from the prior year. And any funds in excess of 4% growth are allocated as the finance committee, based on recommendations made by the finance committee. That could be capital, that could be other areas, but I'm going to leave it open.
Or the Board
Yeah.
of Selectmen,
Well, they'll bring in their recommendation,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
The people are,
to be allocated.
to be allocated, thank you.
Yeah.
So I move that we cap budget growth at 4% each year, with any excess of 4% to be allocated, period.
Right, some years it may just go straight to stabilization, and some years they're,
Yeah,
you know, it
right.
might be all roads, you know. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that we recommend a 4% growth rate for the municipal and school budgets with any available funds in excess of 4% to be allocated
Period.
on a annual basis.
Well, I'm sorry, one other piece of that, if funds are less than 4%,
Right,
then they're split
Right.
evenly. Yeah.
right.
Even
Not to
growth rates.
exceed 4%.
Not to exceed 4%.
Yep.
Yeah.
Further discussion?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I would like to discuss perhaps lowering that amount to 3.5% the first year, so that we get an idea of where everything is, and
I am concerned with being overly optimistic I haven't been in the numbers as much as Craig has, for sure.
Well, this is self-governing. If it isn't enough to do 4%, once we get the real numbers from Carol, then it will drop to 3.5 or 3.75 or 3.9 or 2.5 or whatever that number is, because we capped it. My fear is if we set it at 3.5%, we're setting it at a lower growth rate than last year. Last year grew slightly more than 3.5%.
On both.
On both sides.
Budgets.
And we're setting it less than last year's growth on a year when we have excess revenue potentially coming in. And,
for capital projects.
well, excess
Yes.
revenue coming in, yeah. Our revenue is increasing.
And we know the municipal side is going to grow because we just added 2 police officers.
Right, so if you set it at 3.5%, they're immediately
Maintenance
looking.
of the line roads.
I did.
True, yeah, because it hasn't been voted to go over yet, right? Go ahead.
I think we need to maybe check the record from last week's meeting, tri-board meeting, but I'm pretty sure I heard Mr. Catalano say that they were anticipating, he said, he wasn't certain of it, but he thought near 6% growth.
Right. That's what I thought I
for,
heard.
That's what- yeah.
2021.
That's when he talked about his contractual, his wish list, and his needs list. If he gets his needs as contractual, it's about 4. I wrote the numbers down when they came in that night, and his wish list isn't things like a new track. It's wish list like an additional reading specialist, because we have more kids who need it. They're not outlandish.
Above level
Yeah,
service.
Yeah.
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 Right, but again, that's still just their operating budget.
That's just their operating
So they
budget.
have.
Track
they
was a good
always have-
example.
They always have capital
Yeah.
requests as well.
Yeah.
My reservation with voting in favor of the motion before us is still consideration of whether the Glen new revenue is included or not. And I don't know how you amend the current motion to consider that or not. I would like to see this model with line 3 taken out or, excluded elsewhere.
All of the growth from the Glen excluded from,
Put it in one of these other lines, there's a couple of debt exclusion, not a debt exclusion, but there's other offsets where revenue that is not to be included in the split equation. I'd like to see that line 3, moved to that and see what it looks like.
I'd go with the 4% if that was done, Madam Chair.
Well, you won't be able to achieve 4% anywhere near that if that's done, because the first year you're going to take out about 200,000, the second year you're going to take out about 577,000, the third year it's going to be 900 and almost $1 million, the fourth year it's going to be about $1.4 million that's coming out, because it's cumulative, as you go across.
right, because it's the
Yeah.
homes that were built
And when you're done, you'll be
in
taking
21
$2.8
plus
million.
22 plus 23.
Under that explanation, you basically said that the drastic budget cuts that you're foreseeing down the road, we would be making this year if it weren't for the Glen,
Yes,
under that logic.
exactly.
And to date, we haven't discussed that at all in previous, 3-4 years of finance committee meetings.
Yeah.
We haven't had that discussion.
Well, let me be clear, I don't think it's this year, I think next year. I think this year would probably be okay, because let's say there's 200 in the Glen, let's say that 698 has 200,000 in it. We've got 215 going into the capital, I think you could see 4% growth. I think you'd still see 4% growth if the Glen was excluded this year. So if you want to say this year that the Glen revenue is devoted towards roads or capital projects this year, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, because, the new growth revenue from the Glen being devoted, they equal.
It's basically the same, and that's what I see.
It gets complicated on out years.
A couple of years ago, we had talked about that if the Glen did not come online, then we were facing a grim reality with our budgets here in town.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, I've had the advantage of having the Excel sheets to play with a little bit, so I've seen
Yeah.
what Craig is talking
I will
about.
email these out to everybody. I'll have Deidre email these out to everybody. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll send you the Excel version.
I've seen
Back
previous
tomorrow.
drafts, so I could play with the growth rates and move numbers around and see what that did. And it's true, without the Glen coming on, there would have to be significant budget cuts, just because the other growth rates, and we know Millis doesn't have a whole lot of growth. This is a huge project to come into town that really helps boost that growth rate. And without it, it's hard to keep pace with all of the other expenses that we have in town.
The normal contractual expenses.
Yes. Well, and mandates that come
Right.
down, and the other costs that increase. I mean, certainly, our benefits, the costs, a 6% growth rate on benefits is hard to sustain in a budget that is paid for by so few taxpayers.
I just feel like we're doing a disservice by not looking at both models. I mean, I think Craig has done a great job in this. There's a lot of data here, and I think it helps explain it. I think we're doing a disservice by not looking at them side by side. And I know he can whip through the numbers and say, hey, I feel like, this, we're gonna have we're forcing a difficult budget situation I'd like to see it. And I think that's how you make decisions, with the data in front of you. I don't feel comfortable making a change on something that's been in place for 15 to 20 years somewhat arbitrarily. You can study it to death, and that's not what I'm advocating,
But study it more.
Well, I'm actually advocating a much more conservative approach than what we would do if we did what's in place for 20. Having been the only one on the board that put it in place 22 years ago, I'm saying it's time to change it, because it's too rosy and optimistic when you have this good of budget growth. So if we sent the departments out there at a 65-35 split of available revenue coming in, we're going to have a phenomenal year. We're going to meet all of our needs. We'll be able to add positions. We'll be able to open the Council on Aging longer. We'll be able to add more hours. We'll be able to do a lot of things. But in a few years, all that's going to come due, and we're going to have to start cutting that same stuff. And I can share that model with you and let you see
But
it.
all those things get voted on, right? All of the above-level service items all get discussed, debated during FinCom proceedings, and then they go to town meeting. Any above-level service request essentially would get voted on. So it's not like it's not gonna happen automatically.
I mean, we have,
Just because
just
you-
in voting budgets here, we can try to control the growth in the budgets to some extent, whether we take an arbitrary 4% number or not, right? Just in how we recommend. Again, this is awesome. I mean, I think this is, all of the stuff that Craig's done and Carol's done and all the things that we've been working on, the improvement versus prior years is just astonishing, but I'm not ready to make that change right now. I would love to see the other model, and it doesn't make sense to me that all of a sudden, we're in this dire position that we have to make a change for this coming fiscal year or else. That doesn't make sense to me, because it seems like we would have had that idea and we would have discussed that prior to this. And basically, we had one tri-board meeting and this meeting, and we're talking about voting on changing an allocation scheme that frankly is just as arbitrary as this one. And I still think we have the ability to make reasonable decisions for fiscal year '21 while we continue to flesh this out and get a better sense of department budgets and growth rates and really understand this a lot better. You understand it, Craig, because you've been putting it together, and your confidence level is obviously very high that you're right. I'm not at that same level, and so it's hard for me to vote in the affirmative on something that's as significant as this when I'm not there in terms of the confidence level.
So is it, okay, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think we do owe the department's guidance. So the guidance that you're proposing is stick at 65-35?
Right now, my default is to just have them do. Part of the reason, too, is that we're so close to the date that I think it may cause problems with, the departments to scramble and squeeze everything down to 4%. Now, maybe you know differently. Maybe you had conversations.
My only thought is 4%, they will have to squeeze it down to 4%. You're right. But that's going to be a 0.5% better than they had last year. Last year was 3.5%.
Right. Okay,
So,
but-
yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to table this discussion.
We have a motion to table.
We have a motion on the table.
We have a,
I'll withdraw my motion and stick with 65-35. We need to give guidance to the departments. We owe the departments guidance. We're not doing that now, and.
Well, wait, are they not currently operating under the same procedures that they have been?
Well, we are, and if you'd like, we're going to discuss this in 2 weeks. I will email the worksheet to everybody. You can plug in your same 65-35, and so put in a 5% growth rate for this year and see how that percolates out. You'll see we run out of money about FY '25 or '26.
Can we
so I think,
discuss it next week?
yeah, we have a,
Next week, we don't have a meeting.
We can.
I can't. I've got, well, you can have it. I won't be able to here to present anything.
okay.
Yeah.
So we hadn't discussed whether we were going to have we talked about having a meeting next week,
When is posted?
but we're not sure if we have a quorum. How many of us could make a meeting next week? All right, so I don't think we're going to have a quorum.
I can make it.
2, 3, 4, but with 4, we can't.
4 and a key person.
Yeah.
Not available.
So we'll cancel next week's meeting, but if Craig can send out the worksheet, I mean, I think it makes sense that we provide guidance to the departments. I just think we're not there yet. And if everyone can, look at the Excel sheets and also think about how, what's the best way to provide guidance for fiscal year '21? And then we have our next tri-board meeting. Did we set that up? I can't even keep.
Okay, so on, next week's the 19th, we're not going to meet. The
Right.
following Wednesday is when you will present, or you will present to the select board and the school committee. It hasn't officially been called the tri-board, it can be.
Okay.
No, I
And
think
that would be Wednesday, the 26th.
26th.
I think the plan was to present our recommendation.
Right.
So we determine our recommendation earlier, and then we present it at that meeting, if we.
Well, maybe it won't really be a
Yeah.
full recommendation. Maybe it'll just be another discussion, and we'll be further along. I mean, because we won't be able to have a full recommendation in time for our next meeting with, well, right, because the
So what we're
26th is
gonna
the
do,
next time we're
gonna
going to meet.
Invite the
School.
school committee
School.
and the selectmen
Yes.
to our meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Is there an opportunity at all in the next 2 weeks to have a meeting prior to the 26th of this?
Monday's out because it's the holiday. Tuesday, I've got the charter committee. Wednesday, I had a tentative plan, but, and then Thursday, I'm available theoretically. And I don't know who else is available. I don't know if people who are gone for school vacation week.
20.
I'm waiting on Doug.
For the 20th on Thursday?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.
As far as-
20th?
Yep.
Reschedule for the, all right. So it's not a cancel, it's a reschedule.
At 2:20.
Yep.
All right. And I will send out the electronic version, and I will move the Glen into its own line. That's gonna, all right, so we'll do that. I think I can do that quickly.
Madam Chair, is there going to be any discussion by at least putting the employee benefits with the school and it comes off the top on the school? You said it does anyway, but
The employee,
just
yeah.
let's right now put it with it so they're cognizant about what the costs are with employees.
I think that's a recommendation we can definitely make to the select board and the school committee, that we'd like to see that change in how the budgets are presented and the growth rates that, because then that would affect the growth rates as well, if it's included within there.
Could I make a motion that we ask for that for this year?
You don't have to make a motion, we can just
I
ask
don't
for
know
it.
why we don't.
We can, we're just,
You have to make a motion to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So right now I have a motion to table the initial, or to do.
and it was
I'll withdraw
withdrawn.
it.
It was withdrawn.
Yeah, there was a second.
Yeah.
vote.
Yeah.
We can
Did
vote on
someone
it.
second it?
I'll second it. I think if it's withdrawn, we don't really have to,
So he's
Yeah.
withdrawing the initial one.
yep. I know, I was thinking we probably had to circle back with all that. Too many people talking at once.
Too many motions at once.
Get you a gap.
No, thank you. I do want to thank you, Craig, though, for putting in the work on this. It is really helpful to have this on a spreadsheet. It can help focus us on the issues rather than kind of talking in circles about when we can't see it in black and white. I definitely appreciate the work that you've put into it, and it helps narrow down some of these questions that we still have.
Yeah, and if we all can get comfortable with the numbers and the assumptions and the forecasts, and then it makes it a lot easier.
I think we're pretty close. Once everyone can kind of see the sheets and you have a chance to play with it a little bit, you can kind of see a little better how everything ties
And
together.
I'd just like to piggyback on what Craig said, is that going through something like this spring shows the importance of not adding staff at the fall town meetings.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that's my biggest fear, looking at that 4%, 4.5%, even more.
can't.
I don't see how we're going to cover that position on the municipal
Well, they
side.
thought the marijuana money would be the school resource officer, would take care of one of them, but
But that's not coming in this year, apparently.
right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Times this.
All right. So let's look at the minutes that we have to approve.
One more question.
Yes.
So at meeting next Thursday, just going to do the revenue split, or did you want?
Just revenue spread.
We'll just focus on revenue split.
As much, but I want to.
Revenue spread, this will be emailed out to everybody ahead of time. When you break it, don't come crying to me. No, I will be glad to save a copy on your desktop, then go back to the one you broke. So I'm working at work now. But you can change assumptions, you can put numbers in, you can change things around and just keep going back to the emailed one. So Deidre, I'll send you an electronic version. You send it out to everybody. Due to open meeting laws, I don't think I can help you if you break it.
Madam Chair,
I could just resend.
Yeah,
Just-
just resend.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we vote to approve the minutes from the November 4th Finance Committee meeting as written, as well as the, I'll do one at a time.
Okay.
So for the November 4th meeting of the Finance Committee.
Second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to recommend approval of to approve the minutes from our Finance Committee meeting of November 4th. Comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain, I wasn't here.
Make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the February 6th meeting of the Finance Committee as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the tri-board meeting minutes of February 6th as presented. Discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And one abstention.
Abstain, sorry. I was trying to read them.
All right, any other business that we need to attend to before we adjourn? I do want to say thank you, Deirdre. I know you've put in a lot of work of copying and scanning and all of that. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Just bring those packets to.
Yeah, don't lose these.
Madam
And I'll
Chair,
tell Joyce to come see you and get hers.
I move to adjourn.
Oh, right, it's right there. I already did.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Great. Our next meeting will be next Thursday.
Sorry.
Thank you, everyone.
All due respect.
No, I understand. No, I get it.